Hello.
Hello, hello. This is our post-Hells show.
We came back. We survived.
Yeah, we survived.
Thanks to
J-Dog.
Justin, though. That was fun.
That was amazing.
And a lot of new subscribers, so thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it all goes to Justin because,
Absolutely.
he helped us out a lot with that. And it was a good fucking time. And hopefully we can do it again.
Absolutely.
Soon with, another topic.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to talk about Sonic Youth tonight, so maybe we'll lose some subscribers.
Yeah. But we were going to do 97, which we are still going to do with, our buddy, your brother, BLO.
Yeah, brother's a little much. My cousin I have to see on Thanksgiving. But
estranged brothers.
Yeah.
But,
I wanted to end on 90 because this is such a great year and a pivotal, awesome year. We have to end on 97 now, which is like, ending with like syphilis.
Yeah. So there's some really good stuff though.
There is.
Looking at 97, it is kind of a pivotal year, but 90 is definitely, I think, a much better year. So yeah, I agree. Would have been better to end the 90s on 90.
We also have been.
I know a lot of people are probably like, why didn't you just start with 90 and go to 99? But I don't know. I
kind of like the way we did it though.
Just jumping around and kind of.
There's also a lot of stuff too. I mean, a lot of us, people know we like a lot of hard rock and stuff like that. And for 90, it's kind of the long 80s where we're going to talk about some hard rock records, which I've been excited about because in the mid to late 90s, we didn't really get to talk about a lot of hard rock stuff, especially 99. There was like.
That's the thing. And I think that like 91 and 92, when we did those, there were just too many good death and thrash metal albums that came out that we didn't really focus too much on hard rock.
Mm-hmm.
We did a little bit here and there, but I think 90 is probably going to be the same, but there's still a lot of great things happening. A lot of changes from
the 80s, yeah.
The 80s and coming into, there's some, Seattle albums that came out in the 90s, but death metal, I think, is one of the best years.
I think this
for
is
me.
much more your style of death metal, especially for 90.
Yes.
Like it's a lot of that thrash to death metal kind of like. I guess it's a great place to start with death metal in 1990 because it comes out of like, the thrash thing. You have a lot of great bands that are kind of doing something new styles forming. I mean, I may as well start off. I mean, with 1990. I mean, Obituary, Cause of Death.
Yeah.
And Death, Spiritual Healing, two of my favorite albums from 1990, classic death metal records, have that kind of Celtic frosting with the Obituary sound.
Mm-hmm.
Cause of Death is a lot of people's favorite Obituary record.
You mean Obituary listens to Celtic Frost?
Yeah.
There's no way.
Who would have known?
Yeah,
I mean, but that's a lot of people. It's everybody's favorite Obituary record. It's not mine. Mine's
and slowly, that was 89, I think, right? Slowly,
89,
which I think that to me is groundbreaking. But Cause of Death is like the absolute. When you look up Obituary in the Metal Dictionary, that album is sitting right there. It's an iconic album cover.
Which should have been a Sepultura album cover.
For Arise.
And Beneath the Remains was supposed to be the Obituary.
That's who's the artist? Michael Whalen.
Yeah.
That's kind of like a sci-fi artist. Did some really killer stuff, but that album was huge for me. Now, admittedly, I didn't hear it until years later. I mean, 1990, I was 10, 11 years old.
I was 5.
So, I wasn't listening to... Now, in 90, I was listening to, fucking Kiss and Ozzy.
Sure.
And Warrant and, stuff that my older sister listened to. And I have an older cousin that was into that stuff. Van Halen was like number one for me. So this didn't come until several years later when I started cracking open some of the heavier stuff. And then when I went back and heard Cause of Death, instantly, I mean, vocally, it's different.
Yeah, production's perfect.
Dude, it's so good. I
like the flat production and Incomplete, and I like, Alan West being back, but James Murphy, so many classic tracks on Cause of Death. It's really their pivotal moment. Everything said, the cover, everything about it is just very death metal. There weren't a lot of bands that sounded like Obituary at that time. You got to put yourself in that time and place.
Mm-hmm.
But Spiritual Healing was the first death I ever bought. And I love that record so much. I love Leprosy and I love Scream Bloody Gore. I think Spiritual Healing is almost like the last proper, real death metal record they did.
It is,
dare
because
say,
if you go to Human, it's a completely, it's just progressive technical death metal, which I love. And I know when we were, in the last episode, when we were doing the Mount Rushmore of death metal, and we spoke about death. And I know that, some people probably feel like death, it's like there's certain eras,
Definitely.
To me, it's like the first 3 albums. That's like one group of people that I only like the old school stuff.
Which I could respect people saying that.
Yeah, because it is completely groundbreaking. Nothing sounds
like I do with Napalm. Like that's same thing.
And then it's like then you have the Human individual thought patterns, kind of symbolic,
a little more progressive,
but
still death metal.
But I love Bill Andrews, his playing on that album. He's awesome. Simplistic, but I've always loved his playing.
It's not too technical yet, but it's getting.
There's some differences here and there, but I think they're minor. I always thought, especially with the Repka album cover.
Great album cover.
Excuse me. It really does kind of fit with
Living Monstrosity. It's awesome songs, man.
Yeah, for sure.
I remember Fenris like shitting on this record famously because it's when Death started to kind of lyrically move a little different, where they started talking about more social issues, where Fenris said they started talking about voting.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, because that is a good point, because it did move away from zombie ritual to stuff like that.
Which I could see also alienating people too. I mean, it's different. It's a bit of a It starts their departure towards something else, but it still, for me, retains that kind of thrashy death metal sound.
Yeah.
Which, also, for 1990, I think we got to talk about Left Hand Path. We haven't talked about Entombed enough, really, I think, here in this retrospective. But Left Hand Path, I think
we should just piss a lot of people off and do one Wolverine Blues episode.
I would love it.
And just talk about it for like 4
now,
hours.
Now, as much as I famously love Wolverine Blues, I will say, with Grave Plague, like we did, Tommy and I, the band I did, I'm obsessed with Swedish death metal. If you own Left Hand Path, it's one of the greatest albums ever.
Yeah.
Start to finish. I put it on 3 times this past week, and was just, there was cum everywhere. Like you had to wipe it off. It's still just that good of an album. It's amazing.
Yeah. It's again, it's another iconic death metal album. One that I always, all of these albums we're going to talk about when it comes to death metal, I listen to these albums regularly.
And still very, very punk influenced, very thrashy. Like Left Hand Path still retains that remnants of the 80s in that early sound. There's still, you can hear the 80s in it. And I think that's what's cool about a lot of these records from 90. Eating Back to Life, Cannibal Corpse I put on. And again, the same thing. It's like, I was blown away. And I like Eating Back to Life, but it's not a record I really jam often.
Yeah, it's my favorite Cannibal Corpse.
But when I put it on, dude, Mangled, I was like, this is like, because Paul and I kept hanging out, he's like, talking about Mangled, and I was like, man, I remember how great that track is. Sick. Like, it's so, like, this is insane. It's like crazy thrash, awesome, like the vocals are sick. You can see why they became such a big band.
Yeah, no,
Chris
for sure.
Barnes isn't a weeded out drug dealer on 79th. He's like, he's still got it together.
Dude, there's something about ever. Just
I actually don't think that. Why do you think that is? Because I wouldn't say that. I would say that we're talking about Morgoth, Eternal Fall. I think those vocals. I think LG, Entombed, Tardy.
Eternal Fall. That's Mark.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did you say Gruva or Grua or whatever?
I think that's way.
Who was on my list when we did the Mount Rushmore death metal.
I was gonna bring them too, and Van Drunen, but I did.
Yeah, dude, because it's no, I agree completely. But in terms of like changing the game, Barnes doesn't get enough credit for that.
I can see
because
that.
I think that he's become such a caricature just recently. He
did push it to a new extreme. You're right.
That's what I'm saying. So that's why I think that he is kind of the death metal vocalist. When you talk to people about death metal, even a lot of people who aren't death metal fans, like everybody will bring up Cannibal Corpse to me.
Yeah, Hammer Smash Face.
Exactly. And it's obviously because of the Ace Ventura connection.
Yeah, and it is
like
so
that.
extreme. it's so over the top. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is
and I think I was watching an interview with Brian Slagle when he saw, I think it was Skull Full of Maggots. He heard that song, or I think it was that.
I think it was Skullful, man.
And
Because it was on their demo. I think they got them.
And he was just like, I have to put them on this. Like, it just needs to be. Maybe it was Skull Full of Maggots, and he said, I don't know what this is, but I have to put it on there.
I mean, it's extreme. It definitely, and that record it's crazy. I think it really, it's hard to put yourself back. We do this a lot with this, but you have to put yourself back in that time. There really is, and we're going to get into some of the kind of the thrash and death metal for me with 90 kind of blended together a little bit.
Yes.
And I started talking about, I started thinking about bands like Demolition Hammer.
There's two, Demo Hammer and Ex Hoarder.
Right.
Are they death? Are they thrash?
It's teetering on a line where it's like if I were a kid in 1990 and I had, Slaughter in the Vatican, I would probably buy a Camp Corpse record and get it wouldn't be too much. I wouldn't think about it being death metal. They would probably both be, or they'd both be kind of crazy thrash.
For sure. No, I agree.
100%.
A lot of people, like, if people said, oh, it's thrash metal, I'd say, yeah, okay. If they said it's death metal, I'd say, yeah, okay.
Existence is heavy, man.
It's heavy as fuck, dude.
Swallowed in Black by Sadist is very teetering.
That's another one. They took that, though all of these bands took that thrash sound and they just added that extra oomph to it, and it made it like a little more extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, they kind of towed that line where, Slaughter in the Vatican just, to me, looks like a thrash metal album.
As a hardcore death metal fan, when I was really into death metal as a kid, I got into Morbid Saint, Spectrum of Death, because to me that was like a death metal record.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like death. It was just, I didn't think of it as a thrash record. I thought of it as just something like an extreme metal kind of death metal record. So whereas you could say it's a thrash record, but we'll get into some other albums I think are more thrash related. But like Beyond the Unknown, Incubus, Opprobrium, whatever you want to call them at that time.
Opprobrium or whatever they're called. I call them Incubus.
Yeah, Incubus, the real Incubus, not the hippie Nelson's Life
shitty,
Incubus.
pretentious.
Right. But that's a death thrash kind of like hybrid that toes that line too, and it's great. It reminds me of what I loved about Beneath the Remains and stuff like that, like Arise. It's that bridge between those two styles.
Yeah.
Which is hard to do, and not a lot of bands do that well now. It's funny that hasn't been done. Death metal is such an established genre that people aren't doing that anymore with thrash. But it's cool. It was almost like thrash's logical endpoint, like where it got, which is cool.
Yeah, no, I agree. And you had another big Carnage,
Dark Recollections. I mean, I love Dismember, one of my favorite bands of all time. Obviously, that's great.
Yeah.
I think Dark Recollections, the Carnage stuff, I like more than the Nihilist stuff, like the pre-tuned stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like, yeah.
I think it's more well put together.
Yeah, I think it's a tad better.
I can hear Dismember and Carnage. Nihilist to Entombed, I think, is a bit more of a leap. But I love Nihilist for what it is, but it's more of a leap for me sonically than the Carnage stuff was. I think Carnage pairs really well with the rest of Dismember. It worked a lot better. Also, we talked about Vader with Justin, Morbid Reich. That's another kind of thrashy. That's an underrated release too.
That's another thing. It's like, it's death metal. I mean, Vader is death metal, but it's so thrashy. It is. That whole album, or that whole demo, the Morbid Reich demo, and switching gears from the death thrash stuff, you had Paradise Lost, Lost Paradise.
Awesome. I was listening to that a lot this past week too, and there's not a lot of doom stuff. I had Winter Into Darkness, which is another pivotal record from '90, but Paradise Lost and Winter, I think, don't get enough credit for. We talked about Cathedral '91. A lot of people think of Cathedral as kind of starting this new second wave of doom, but it's really Winter and Paradise Lost. As I was jamming, this first Paradise Lost record, they really set the tone for that new doom kind of wave. This is not a lot of bands were doing these riffs that slowly with that kind of tempo.
Especially on what was Winter? Were they on Relapse? Or
Winter,
Nuclear Blast.
I think they were on Nuclear Blast.
No, I could be right, but yeah, but still, it's like, but they have one album out, and unfortunately,
Maybe Peaceful. Maybe Winter might have been Peaceful. I don't remember.
I'd have to look that up. But yeah, Paradise Lost. I mean, I don't think that it's, again, this is another Paradise Lost with Lost Paradise and with Gothic. That's a whole different era from what they ended up becoming.
It's like Anathema.
They really did change with like Shades of God, and then Icon was like a big
Draconian Times,
and then Draconian Times, and then it just like really started going off into different territory. But Lost Paradise to me is, I think it's a fucking incredible album.
I think it's also really, really, in the context of 1990, I was looking, there is this, everything's kind of forming. And this is a real germination where it's like we just talked about Carnage. Like Nirvana 2002 is a band we haven't talked about at all, but Disembodied Spirits, they're released in 1990. One of my favorite death metal bands of the 90s is Nirvana 2002. One of the most unsung Swedish death metal bands of all time. But all those bands are still kind of fast. Like the way
they changed their name, didn't they, because of Nirvana?
Yeah, they did because of the. We'll get to Nirvana, the real Nirvana, later on. but Paradise Lost really, I don't think they get enough credit for really forming this kind of doom thing. And as I was listening back, it's like they deserve more credit for that.
I think it's because it's good to see that they kind of had like a resurgence in popularity in the past decade plus maybe. But I think it's because they put so many albums out that just sounded like Depeche Mode.
Yes.
They lost a lot of people. Kind of like another band that I'm going to bring up with Thrash when we get there, and I'll get to that. When we get to Thrash, I'll bring them up. But I think that when you change your style, or you put out so many shitty albums for such a long time, or what people would think are shitty albums, I don't.
Yeah.
The weird thing is when you listen to those Paradise Lost albums, they're really well written as far as I'm concerned.
They're all well put together.
That's the thing. It's like, I think they're catchy as hell, but that's not Paradise Lost to me. Like,
you lose
to me,
the plot a little bit.
It does, and it wasn't until several years later when, they kind of came back into that like doomier sound.
Yeah.
And they've been putting out some incredible albums since, and I know Nick is now in Bloodbath.
I didn't know. Oh, okay.
He does vocals now for Bloodbath. I think he took over for Michael Ackerfeld
from Opeth,
because he's probably like
the singer
dressed up like
didn't
fucking.
Didn't the singer Catatonia play bass in Bloodbath?
I
think he did.
I'm not.
Records.
I have Bloodbath albums, but they're not like one of my.
They're not one of my favorite bands. I know my friends.
To me, they're just like a really cool band.
Yeah. I know Biello, who we're gonna go with, is a big fan. I know some people really like them. I've never really beyond the first couple records. But I was gonna say about going back bands. I feel like that about Tales from a Thousand Lakes by Amorphis. I feel like Amorphis has put out so many albums that are aids that people look at. Tales from a Thousand AIDS, like super AIDS, like stuff that you're like Philadelphia, like you're on the deathbed, you're in the courtroom taking your shirt off. There's lesions on your body. It's horrible. But I feel like that's why people look at Tales from a Thousand Lakes as so bad, because if Amorphis would have stopped at that record, I feel like people would like it.
Yeah.
But they have now this identity as being what they are now, that people look at that record like this is where it really starts to suck,
Yeah, and I was thinking on the way up with certain bands like this, like that's bringing up Amorphis, were they really the Karelian Isthmus Band and the Privilege of Evil? Is that who they were?
Probably not. You're right. They probably
or was it really Elegy that they kind of came into their own and what they wanted to do, and then just kind of went from there? Because honestly, from after Elegy on to now, their music has not really changed.
No, that's what they are.
It's like one giant album, and although I dig those albums, it does really kind of meld into like one colossal album. Mm-hmm. And so I think, to me, that's who Amorphis wanted to be, not the Corellian Isthmus, that I think is one of the most underrated death metal albums
I agree.
ever.
I think Privilege of Evil is,
Yeah.
great. And again, I usually don't do that with bands, but they're one of the few bands I'm like, I wish could have had like a little bus accident that like, I don't want anybody to die, but like I don't want anybody to die.
Just
but I want,
name them so
just
they
like the band breaks up. Maybe it's a bad enough accident where they just decide like let's just start something else.
I'm the one guy who will say I love Elegy. I don't know if you say it, Twanella. I love those albums. Am Universum. I love the new vocalist. I think he's great. I think they're a phenomenal band, but I also understand 100% why you don't want to risk getting, full blown fucking gonorrhea by listening to it. Like, I get that, but
you need a trip to the free clinic. After
yeah,
it's not. But there's a lot of I know Tiamat. They're one of those bands that Sumerian City.
Yeah, there's another band.
That's like they're another band that like people forget that they have a record in '90 that's so pivotal. Like that's an amazing death metal record.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of Tiamat fans probably don't even care about Sumerian City. You could be a Tiamat fan and never listen to this record. Like,
because let's face it, I think Wild Honey was the band that really catapulted them.
And that's probably what they wanted to be. But yeah, that's probably what they were.
Yeah, it was more gothic. I think Wild Honey is absolutely a legendary.
I think Wild Honey's a cool record too.
It's great, but yeah, Sumerian Cry is totally not. You can have somebody listen to a deeper kind of slumber, which is. I remember buying that album back in I think it was like '97, maybe it came out, and I totally different band to me.
Yeah,
completely 100%. Different. But other great death metal. You had Cancer, To the Gory End.
Awesome. Also kind of thrashy too.
Nocturnus, the Key with that kind of. It's funny because Arnie, friend Arnie, he back in the day I remember saying, "What do you think of Nocturnus?" Because anything that was old school, that was Florida or that was on Earache or Relapse, Nuclear Blast, I'm like, what do you think? I would always ask him. And I remember him talking about Nocturnus, and he wasn't into him. He was just like,
I've never been
into it.
Too.
You got Mike Browning doing vocals and drums at the same time.
I wasn't into Nocturnus when I was younger either.
But he was like, he said the vocals were like,
yeah.
And then I listened to it and I thought, dude, this is really fucking cool because I love that album and I love that band. I even think the Nocturnus AD shit recently was fucking great because I love that like evil, it's kind of like satanic, but it's like sci-fi.
Yeah.
That whole aspect to it. And I think Mike Browning, I think that band doesn't get enough credit, honestly. And the Key is one of those legendary, and probably should have brought it up in our last episode.
Honestly, a great, I'm not even trying to be funny, a great example of how you incorporate keyboards and other kind of musical elements into death metal, and it's still pretty cool. It's technical, very ahead of its time. I think as far as like stuff that lays the groundwork for more technical stuff, more layered stuff, it definitely plays a role. But also, I look at Nocturnus like not in a vacuum either, because there's bands like, good segue to thrash, like bands like Zentrix, for Whose Advantage, like that's a really technical kind of thrashy album.
Do you say Zentrix or Eccentrix?
I say,
because I used to say Zentrix.
I think it's the X is silent, so I always say Zentrix.
Because I always said Zentrix, and then because I heard some people say Zentrix,
makes more sense, yeah.
And then some people were like, no, it's Eccentrix. Because some people are like, do you like Eccentrix? Do you like Thrash? And I'm like, who?
Right.
What the fuck Eccentrix is? And then they're like, for who's it? Oh, I'm like,
it's really technical, and that kind of brings like, a cooler element to it too. Which is like, I think with death metal, the thing that really was separating it from thrash was like, again, one of my favorite death metal records from this era is For God Your Soul, From Your Flesh, Punch and Stench. Obviously, love Punch and Stench. I
like that I gave you that shirt and you butchered it.
Well,
Riff sleeves.
I got it. It's what the.
No, that's another great. That's another great one.
Our lovely angelic host at Hell's Headbangers appreciates the sleeveless shirt. So a beautiful angel that helped us along our way.
Well,
but Punch and Stench was one of those bands that, it was not about the extremity of the music necessarily, the technicality of the music. It was the lyrical content that was really insane, and that's where Cannibal went. It was like so extreme with the vocals. Like Punch and Stench was so over the top with the lyrics. Like thrash was kind of getting to a point now in '90 where you had to do something. You had to get more musical, and that's why I think Never Neverland, Annihilator, so progressive. I love that.
Dude, we got to talk about the one album before we go to thrash. Napalm Death.
I was gonna get there, but
okay, because that's your band. We got to talk about the Scott Burns hatred.
I mean,
which I don't. Harmony Corruption's my favorite Napalm Death album.
All right. Well, let me. I said it to my friend, a good friend of mine, Ryan West. This is like talking about Dom to me. So when I have to pause and get my words together right, because this band means more to me than a lot of things. But I told my friend Ryan Westling plays in a lot of bands, and we've been friends for a long time. I messaged him this morning. I was like, man, I've been listening to Harmony for like the last 2 weeks nonstop. Never has a record made me want to start projects and stop playing music more in my life. Every time I listen to it, I want to start a project and quit altogether because it's so perfect. Mick Harris, the 1 foot machine gun. It's I love, for fans of older Napalm, I mean, I love Scum, love Fido, love the hardcore stuff they did, but Harmony Corruption really is such a perfect extreme metal record. It's a bridge between hardcore punk and death metal in a way that has never been done before or since. It's amazing. Everything about it is perfect. The sound is perfect. Everything is so.
So you think the sound is perfect? Because
I say the sound of the song. Now the production with Scott, I don't like. That's why I like Utopia more than I like Harmony.
Okay,
Utopia, because I feel like Harmony Corruption was lacking.
Who did Utopia? Who produced that?
I think still Scott Burns.
Is it?
But it's the way that it's recorded is way different. I believe they did it. I think they did it differently in different ways. I believe it was done. A lot of it was tracked somewhere else, but
I've always wondered that. I'm actually going to.
But Harmony is Harmony is a great record. It's almost the perfect bridge of Napalm Death, where they started to. It's Barney's first album, which, by the way,
no, it was Colin Richardson.
Oh, Colin Richardson. I'm sorry, did that. Yeah.
Look. Harmony's my favorite Napalm Death. Napalm Death is your baby. That's your thing, and it's like. So when I talk about Napalm Death, it's like it's a neophyte coming into this, because to me, I always say it goes between Harmony and Fear, Emptiness, Despair.
Good picks.
Which is also my favorite album from them. Really, I should say the run of the three with Harmony, Utopia, and Fear. Those are my favorite Napalm Death records.
I think that Harmony is it's I say that it's perfect because it's the perfect logical end to what they were doing with Mick Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I love Utopia because I love Danny Herrera on drums. But I think that they brought back a lot of the punk riffing that they had lost on Harmony Corruption. I think like the riffs were pretty death metal, but the drumming and the rhythm section is still very much a punk band.
Yeah,
brought to its logical end, which is really different. Which you don't see with a lot. It's a weird dynamic where you get a rhythm section that's to its logical end, going extreme with punk, with death metal riffs. Which again, you can't look at Harmony in a vacuum, because you have Subconscious Terror with Barney being on that, one of my favorite death metal records of '92. He comes in as more of a death metal vocalist. You also have the riffs, which I think, Mitch coming into the band was, from Righteous Pigs, which stress related, one of my favorite releases of '92. He brought in a different influence.
So do you think with different production,
it would have been perfect? Yeah.
Okay.
But I think it's a perfect transition record. It's not the perfect Napalm Death record. I think Utopia is better because it captures something better.
I can understand the diehard fans not appreciating Scott Burns' production, but he's a fucking death
I could also see being
producer.
a hardcore punk fan who's obsessed with Fido, like hating this record, thinking it's a sellout.
Yeah.
Because it's,
No, for sure. And that's,
which many people did. I mean, they got a lot of
But
hate.
back in the day, I thought they were a death metal band. When I was younger, and then when somebody, you know, I obviously getting more into metal and the heavier side of things and reading stuff, it was like, no, it's grind. He's grind. You know, and I heard some of the early albums. I thought,
Yeah.
the same fucking band. Like I don't understand, you know. But so I can get.
When you listen to Righteous
The
Pigs,
hatred for
when
it,
you
right.
listen to Mitch and in Righteous Pigs, you can hear, you know, you can hear what he brought to the band. More of a crossover influence. The Righteous Pigs records are my favorite records of all time. And I think since we talked about Napalm, I may as well go. You know, What's the Truth by SOB also comes out in 1990, and they were a band that also, like Napalm, had Don't Be Swindle, had
You like Japanese
Leave Me Alone.
like crossover punk?
Oh
like,
yeah. Film
that's
at
weird,
11,
man.
but it's like but SOB was on the same trajectory Napalm.
I'm just letting you know. You put in the Japanese factor. Monster Magnet is finding its way into this episode. I hope you know.
I'm sure it is. I wouldn't have it anyway.
It's like our thing.
But it's
but
same thing. Like they're doing the same kind of thing where
you're the one that got me into most of this, like more of the grind side. It's like, you know, SOB or, you know, Righteous Pigs I've heard you talk about before. I've always seen these albums throughout, you know, for years, and I never really got into that stuff. Just never gave it a chance. And so it's really because you listen to it, and I'm like, let me check it out.
I think it's more the long crossover thing. Like in 1990, you also have Accused, Grinning Like an Undertaker. Like the crossover thing was happening in the 80s. And
That's my favorite Accused.
Love that Accused record. I think that Grind is just maybe the logical conclusion of that crossover thing, where you get like Atrocity, Infected, even Impetigo, Ultimo Mundo, Cannibal, which we were talking about death metal, but to me, Impetigo was always had more of a crossover appeal. They had a lot of thrash and punk, and their influence in their music, it's different. Like Nuclear Death, Bride of Insect, still really punky. These bands like Napalm were doing that. Extreme Napalm Terror and Impulse to Destroy, another band. Like these bands in 1990 are bringing in the punk into the extreme stuff. Violent Noise Attack, Grind Till Deafness, total noisecore, like Sore Throat, Disgrace, Depths of Gods. Like these bands are kind of bringing in more influences. You can still hear it. I think Harmony Corruption has still the punk. If you listen to Mick Harris on drums, the total 1 foot blast. There's never been a record. I think the reason why people like it, by grind fans, orthodox grind fans, love it so much. There's not a death metal record with that kind of drumming.
So are you? Who is it? Harris or Herrera? Which one do you go?
I get a lot of shit for this, but I think for the totality of Napalm's catalog, because I love Napalm's entire catalog, I think Danny fits the band better. Does that mean that I worship Mick Harris?
Do you think he's more of the old?
I think Mick Harris fits the older albums perfectly, but it's almost like a Filthy Taylor and Mickey D kind of situation. Like Mickey D's a better drummer for the rest of Motorhead because they have a lot of records without Phil Taylor.
Yeah,
but the early
I
Motorhead records, like you need Phil Taylor's personality. Like I don't want to hear Danny Herrera on Scum.
No,
I don't think it would fit.
I think that's a perfect.
I don't think Mick Harris is the right drummer for Fear, Emptiness, Despair. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and going from the death metal and you start talking about crossover, we get into thrash, and I think that thrash has had 1990 is another fucking killer year. Some bands putting out probably what a lot of people think are, you know, some fucking straight poop, like Destruction with Crack Brain or Impact is Imminent with Exodus. I don't mind either. I could do without the fucking My Sharona cover of the Destruction album.
That's something.
But for me, my 5 thrash albums from 90, no order. Coma of Souls, Creator. That's my favorite Creator.
Awesome. Good album.
Suicidal, Lights, Camera, Revolution, which could be
a crossover
as well.
I was about to mention it.
Violence, Oppressing the Masses.
One of my favorite records.
Yeah. Slayer, Seasons in the Abyss. And then the band I said I was going to talk about, Anthrax, Persistence of Time, which to me is their heaviest album. I think it's my favorite Sound of White Noise, but Persistence is like right there. I think that album was great after State of Euphoria. They came back harder, heavier, and kind of like they put out so much shit for so long after Sound of White Noise, at least in my opinion, that I don't think that it's back then. Do they belong in? I was talking with a buddy of mine about this actually yesterday. Do they belong in the Big Four thrash? Okay, yes. If you think about it, sure, maybe back then, but since, do they really belong in the Big Four? Like, do you think that Overkill?
Yeah. I think Overkill belongs in there more
Overkill
than
or Exodus or even Testament probably deserve. I would say Overkill.
Overkill and Testament for sure. I was going to say Souls of Black 90, I think, is a great album.
But yeah, and I didn't choose, Testament's my favorite thrash band. I didn't choose Souls of Black as one of my favorite, the five that I, for that year. I also didn't choose Rust in Peace.
I was going to say, I'm going to give you my few.
Go ahead.
I had Rust in Peace, which I love that record. I think, Tornado of Souls is still one of my favorite Megadeth songs of all time.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
The soul was amazing.
I agree with some of the people in the group that the reissues of that is abysmal. And,
I'll get to that.
Well, yeah. Annihilator, I already talked about Never Neverland because I love the progressive.
Yeah, we'll talk
my favorite,
about that too.
Sacrifice, Soldiers of Misfortune. That's my favorite Sacrifice record.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. Awesome. Kind of like I think this Sacrifice record doesn't get enough credit too for moving away from thrash and almost more of a, how to explain it, but there's almost more of a rock feel to it without losing the thrashiness. I feel like they don't get enough credit for that influence. It's an awesome album. Vocals are great on it. I think I already talked about Morbid Saint, which I even say is not really a thrash record. Violence Oppressing the Masses, awesome. Well, everybody talks about Eternal Nightmare, but Oppressing the Masses is awesome. The bass sounds great on it.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of has a crossover hardcore vibe too. It almost reminds me of like Alpha Omega by Cro-Mags. Sometimes.
Yeah, it's because of Sean Killian's vocals that I know a lot of people don't like, but
see, I like it because I think it's more of a hardcore. I think it's cool.
I think it's different.
It is way it's cool.
I think that's the thing. Back in the day, there were so many different styles of thrash vocals, and his were just killer. And I think that Oppressing the Masses is definitely an underrated. I know a lot of people don't like that album, like compared to Eternal Nightmare, and I'm just like, I don't know. I think Oppressing is great.
Merciless the Awakening too. I wanted to mention too for 90.
Yeah, that's big Swedish stuff, but it's also
nice little bridge for black metal too, where it gets it's like Orally Sodom. Has like that kind of vibe. So.
Which Sodom had an album, Better Off Dead.
Better Off Dead, which doesn't get a lot of not one of my favorite Sodom. I think Slayer Seasons in the Abyss though is a great big album. I almost put that in the rock category for 90 because it's a big record for them. It's huge.
I don't get into when there's a lot of people that.
But Twisted into Form is the other record I wanted to say is my third favorite.
Yeah, that's another great album, and to me, Seasons was huge. I would say in 90 I wasn't listening to Slayer.
No.
Okay, I was a little too young. I just hadn't gotten there yet, but
it's probably one of the first Slayers I heard though.
Yeah, exactly. So fast forward a couple years later, and I think that every song on it I fucking love. I mean, Born of Fire, Skeletons of Society is fucking killer.
War Ensemble.
Dude, War Ensemble is fucking phenomenal. Blood Red, Spirit of... I mean, the whole thing is great, and I know it seems like I either talk to people who love it or some of the old guard who are just like, no, it's not as good as the other one. I'm just like, dude, to me, it's like really... Although Divine Intervention was like the last real Slayer to me that kind of harkened back to the early years.
I don't know how you could like South of Heaven and not like Seasons. I mean, it's not like it's that much of a leap.
But yeah, and it's like Seasons is really for me like the last classic Slayer album as far as I'm concerned. But when it comes to Megadeth to me is like, I always liked them better than Metallica, always.
I agree.
But Rust is my third favorite Megadeth. My first is Peace Sells. My second is So Far. And then it goes Rust. Because I would
agree with that.
And it's weird because I never really thought
my first is Peace. Then So Far. Then I flip between So Far So Good, and then I would say Peace. Then So Far So Good. Killing's My Business, or Rust in Peace. They flip flop, I guess.
And Rust in Peace is, dude, it's iconic.
Although I do love Cryptic Writings. I'm kidding, but that's.
But getting to the sound of those remasters, I know some people in the group, we were all commenting on it. I bought, when those remasters came out, I bought all of them. The whole set, which included Cryptic Writings, Risk, and I think that MD45 that Dave did. Remember the Craving? He did it with Leaving from Fear.
Did you just spell like Less Than Jake too or something?
I don't know, but the only reason I bought all these is because if you put it on, like in your shelf, it formed, like a picture. I think it was like Vic Rattlehead or whatever. So I bought all of them. Now I kept all of my old ones. Or no, I actually traded them. I worked at a record store then. I traded them in and bought the remasters. Took them home and listened to them. I sat there one night and I was like, what the fuck is up with it? Like, it just sucked. Like, the production sucked.
They got your money, though.
Euthanasia, they put like a fucking harmonica solo in it or something.
I'll be honest with you, though. I will say, if we're going for favorites, Euthanasia is one of my. I do love that album a lot.
I love it too. I have no.
And I do love Countdown.
But the original version, the original versions of all of those albums to me sounded better. I didn't want to hear. So the next day I worked, I took all the remasters back in, put them back in the reshrink box, and all of my originals were still sitting there. Took them back home, and I was like, fuck that. And I think Dave, maybe it was on Tornado of Souls, or there's some shit on Rust in Peace where he lost the vocals, so he had to re-record the vocals. But it's not Dave in 1990. It's Dave, modern day Dave, so he sounds like a fucking, lawn goblin. I don't know what the fuck, and so...
He's talking about, killing somebody with, a jujitsu, kick, and,
Because he has a black belt, if you've ever read his book.
I don't know if you've ever heard him mention it, but he
every page, it's I think...
He's never lost a fight in his life. So.
Every other line he mentions he's a black belt. But yeah, dude, I think Rust, though, is a great album. I mean, it's you could tell... To me, Dave always had better players in Metallica or in Megadeth. Always.
I think his music necessitated better players too. I also,
for sure.
I think I don't want to say better players. I think he had more technically proficient players. Because I think the guys in Metallica can play. They play to the. I'm going to say Jason Newsted's not a player.
I think all those.
I think
guys
Jason
are
Newsted
great.
could play the living fuck out of Rust in Peace if he wanted to.
Yeah, I think all those guys are... I mean, I love Newsted's playing. I think that James Hetfield is a better rhythm player than Hammett is a lead player.
I think James Hetfield's a better rhythm player than anyone that's played rhythm in Megadeth, too. But I just like Megadeth more. You know what I'm saying?
Megadeth, to me, Dave is eons... His guitar playing is fucking insane, but he's had Chris Poland...
Sure. Their songs written by a lead guitar player.
That's the thing. I think they're just. It's far more technical. The riffs are more technical. Yeah. There's just something
way busier songs.
Yeah. So but that's why I never put Rust in Peace. It would be in my top 10, but if I just chose 5, it wouldn't be in that.
I also
5.
think the dynamic of the first 2 Megadeth records, especially, are way different. Given that it's basically just crackhead heroin jazz music. Which I love, which is to me that band. I think again, there's
Rust is kind of a departure.
There's Megadeth pre and post crack. I mean, a lot of bands have when they stop freebasing, the sound changes.
Yeah.
I hate to say that, but it's they're during freebasing. Megadeth is my favorite version of Megadeth. Give him a crack pipe, you get a great album. It's like Metallica without booze.
Dude, I've said it. For so many years, I'm you need to go back on the fucking booze.
Yeah.
You need.
You want to hear a sober Electric Wizard record? Who wants Electric Wizard to be like, you know what? Honestly, we're just drinking orange juice. People be like, this record sucks.
I want to see fucking Just Osborne literally floating onto stage, so
Same.
much fucking pot smoke that you got to cut it with a knife in order, like that's, and it sounds terrible that you would want, because if you said that to Dave Mustaine, he probably would put you in some fucking jujitsu hold and put you in his next book.
I think Mike from I Hate God, who by the way, this made my sneaky thing to say about I Hate God. They had a record of 90, in the eyes of God, in the eyes of suffering, great record, 1990. Mike from I Hate God always had the great quote where he was like, "I'm not saying to kids, do drugs. I'm just saying that it helped me." Right?
That's the thing. It's like, was Megadeth better when Dave was on drugs? Is that what made Megadeth better? I don't know, but you could make the argument for it, because after drugs, it was Risk. So I don't know what the fuck.
Which somebody who signed for that record to be released on a major label is probably on drugs.
But here's an album that I kept seeing pop up in the Thrash lists for 1990.
I think I know what you're gonna go with.
But I could never. I don't think it's a Thrash album.
I think I know what you're gonna say.
Or Cowboys.
Yeah, I don't think it is either.
Dude, I love Pantera. We're gonna do a Pantera.
It is my least favorite Pantera record.
It is
of the ones of the major. Now we're going
reinventing's mine.
If we're counting Cowboys as the first Pantera record, which we arguably we won't go there.
Mm-hmm.
I do like Metal Magic, hell yeah.
Yeah,
but if we're gonna count Cowboys as the first proper Pantera record, it's my least favorite. And Mike and I were just talking about this before. Mike from Hamburg was here hanging out a little bit before. I feel like the nuances that I like about Pantera, especially the vocal inflection, a lot of the groovier riff, isn't really there. They still retain some of their old stuff enough.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought of it as purely thrash.
No,
But it's confusing sonically in a way that I can't say that I like it most. It's cool, but it's confusing sounding.
Well, it's definitely that bridge between, the early album, especially the first one with Phil, and then because the leap from Cowboys to Vulgar was like,
yeah.
And I just watched a recent interview with Rex where he said that when they were writing Vulgar, and Phil was like doing vocals, when he was recording the vocals for Vulgar, everybody was like, no, you need to do what happened to Cowboys from Hell. Like, what happened to those vocals? Because he was a great singer back then.
Yeah.
And he was like, no, trust me. This is like, it's going to be different. This is where we're going. But Cowboys is like this weird, it's weird when people are like, yeah, they're thrash metal. Because I always think, I don't really hear a lot of thrash. It's like,
I don't hear a lot of Phil Anselmo's personality in Cowboys, which I think is, again, I don't really say this about a lot of bands, but without him on vocals, it's not that band. And people always talk about, I think because obviously the riffing and because he's no longer here, I think people associate Dime as being, he was the heart and soul of the band, but Phil Anselmo really is that band in a lot of ways. Without his vocals, that band is not the same band.
I just got into a huge argument with one of my, he's like a brother to me, huge metalhead, and we're talking about, because I went and saw Pantera recently with BLO, and he calls them Scamtera, and it's bullshit, and it's disrespectful, and I said, look, I get that Pantera was Vinny and Dime's thing.
Sure.
I mean, they were there, Rex was there before Phil, but arguably, I don't even think you can argue it. If it weren't for Phil, they never would have made it out of fucking Fort Worth. Okay,
I agree.
Or wherever, Dallas. They never would have made it out of Texas. It's because of Phil and the shit that he brought to that band, like the different music, the styles, like whatever he was
attitude,
into.
the whole voice. That a band like that needed a voice and a personality, and he really was.
I mean, the first vocalist was not bad, but he wasn't great. He had probably the fucking
imagine that first vocalist singing "Walk."
Yeah.
Think that's a top 10 hit? You think that's a Billboard hit? And they're putting #1 albums. I mean, let's be honest. Like that
first, dude. The name of that first guy, Terry Glaze.
I mean, it was the 80s. I get it.
Which, no disrespect to that, but it's
sure.
And I don't mind those albums. There's something that
It's a sexy name, Terry Glade. I mean, like, that's a sexy name. I mean, like, that's fucking...
Kind of gives me goosebumps when I glaze.
It gives me itches on parts of my body.
I gotta go get crab shampoo now.
Right, that's
but you know, it's... No, dude, like, yeah, but I don't mind if people say cowboys or vulgar when they're like, yeah, they're thrash. To me, it's like, what does Pantera sound like? I don't know. What does Tool sound like? It sounds like Tool. Pantera kind of did their own thing, although I know I'm going to get shit probably for people going, fuck that, they ripped X Order off. It's like, okay, if you listen to the Law, you can certainly hear it.
Again, I've listened to Slaughter in the Vatican a lot for this episode. I think it's obviously a great record. I don't think it's totally... I think that's really an unfair comparison.
I think if you listen to the Law, which is my favorite X Order album,
that's perplexing. But
I think that album's amazing. I think it's
a good album. I think Slaughter in the Vatican is that's surprising. You're the only person I know that thinks that. That's
really
cool. Yeah, that's
fucking love that record, dude. And the riffs, the production, but when you listen to it and you hear Kyle Thomas's vocals, I mean, you know, come on. And you listen to Phil on Vulgar, it's like, okay, like, you know, Phil on Cowboys, not really, you know, that doesn't sound like X Order. You get to Vulgar and it's like, okay, this is, but I don't care. How many bands have taken things from other bands?
Sure.
And X Order wasn't number one on the Billboard charts, okay?
Because the songs weren't there.
Exactly. Now, I love the Law. But I just think that Vulgar and Far Beyond Driven,
100%.
They were just, I don't know, people found that they were better albums. They were, you know, more people like, and that's...
I never heard like Stiff Little Fingers screaming at Green Day that they sold millions of... I mean, it's not like every band kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like, you listen to Stiff Little Fingers and you listen to Dookie, you're like, okay, well, damn. Here's a... You know, I ever heard the Descendants, like, screaming with their fists in the air. They get it.
Yeah.
Every band kind of like, you know...
Dude, it's going to happen, you know. There's going to be bands that come out that obviously lift heavily from other bands, and you're going to have one band that, you know, maybe the original band doesn't get that big, and then the other band just fucking catapults into the stratosphere.
Which we have to talk about, speaking of, I mean, we have to segue here.
Well, let's talk about you, because you brought up Annihilator.
Oh, yeah, we can, yeah.
So, is that your favorite... Is that your favorite Annihilator?
No, Alice in Hell was, but I love Never Neverland a lot. I think that Annihilator, I like a lot of technical thrash, and I think that they're an album. That's an album that I love a lot because I like that style. I like thrash that's more technically proficient.
So, Never Neverland's my favorite Annihilator. I love the song Stonewall is a fucking phenomenal tune. Fun Palace, 6s and 7s, like. That's my favorite. Coburn Farr on vocals, who wasn't obviously Randy Rampage on the first album on Alice in Hell. Coburn Farr ended up in Omen on one of their albums, but you can actually, if anybody gets onto YouTube and you look up Coburn Farr, later in life he ended up. There's like this, I'll show you before I leave for a night. There's this YouTube video of some company that he works at. And he's like the CEO, and he's walking around doing like an infomercial for the company. And it's him, it's Coburn Farr, but he's like a fucking white collar dude, you know, walking around. But I think there was talk of a time, Jeff Waters and, you know, my buddy Rob, who's obsessed with Annihilator. I mean, Rob's Canadian, lives in Edmonton, loves Annihilator, has every album. I mean, bought Jeff Waters, like his edition, you know, his guitar, and has gone to Annihilator fucking practice sessions where you can like pay and just sit there, you know, from like me to you and just watch.
They're sweet band. I mean,
practice.
I think that it's really, I like that style.
I think that Dave was kind of toying in Megadeth with getting.
I've heard that too. That he was,
Here's the thing. I love Annihilator. I love the early albums. I think some of the later albums are
I think that would clash, though, with songwriting.
Yes. And But here's the problem. Jeff Waters, I think, especially now, I think he needs somebody in there. He's a great player. He's fucking insane.
Somebody needs to craft it, though.
But I think that he needs somebody to kind of reel him in and somebody else to take the reins. That's
Which
just
Dave
my
always
opinion.
had, but I think with David Ellefson, I think he always did have that. I think Dave doesn't get enough credit for having people that kind of reel him in a little bit.
Yeah, and I think Never Neverland is a fucking phenomenal album. I mean, it's a great album. And I would say it's arguably probably their last really good one for a long time. I'm trying to think. I think Set the World on Fire was after Never Neverland, and I think Mike Mangini was on drums. I could be wrong, but I think it was Mangini, who's now in Dream Theater.
Which is a nice, that's a logical step.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Annihilator, Extreme, Dream Theater. It's kind of like, okay, that's kind of weird.
I mean, it's.
But yeah, I mean, it was a great year for thrash. There was a really weird, when I was like trying to look up, there's two bands that released albums that to me didn't really fit with any of this shit, and that was Bathory with Hammerheart.
Is 90.
Which I
do like that album a lot.
Yeah, I do. I think
I guess is a thrash. I guess I put it in with the thrash stuff, but it's. I mean,
that was like his Viking phase, and then Celtic Frost with Vanity Nemesis.
I had Vanity Nemesis, but I think also there's also Sabbatical Domain. There's Profanatica has demos. Broken Throne.
A lot of demos this year, like a lot of
Beherit has the Seventh Blasphemy demo. Like I put the Bathory stuff with that.
I think there was a Mortician demo.
Brutally Mutilated, which I was going to talk about.
We already mentioned the Vader demo.
There's too many demos in 1990 to even. That's a whole nother episode. But
let's jump to your thing, which is punk.
Yeah, I mean the two. I mean really, I was going to say before when we were segued, like really the two most important punk records this year, which really set the tone for the decade. You have Anti-Cymex, Country of Sweden, and Poison Idea, Feel the Darkness, which. In the 80s, Anti-Cymex had Raped Ass, and Poison Idea had all their stuff in the 80s, and it was, these two records are way more metallic in a lot of ways and more musical, but they're so incredibly influential, and they stood the test of time throughout the decade that they are essential. Like Country of Sweden, especially by Anti-Cymex, is worshipped. Poison Idea, Feel the Darkness for a lot of people is the greatest American punk record of all time.
That's my favorite. I told you that before. That's my favorite punk album. I
think and a lot of people have that opinion, and whenever somebody says it, I don't bat an eye.
You know who got me in to Poison Idea?
Pantera, probably.
Yes,
the Badge. Yeah,
with the Badge on the Crow soundtrack, because I thought, man, this is fucking great. Then I saw who wrote it, and I was like, Poison Idea, and I went and checked it out, and I thought, first of all, they do a fucking great cover of it, and it's really not that different from the original.
They also do a cover of, I think they did Death, Agony, and Screams on one of the reissues. That was a Gizm song. So.
And that Anti-Cymex, if, when you go back and read a lot of, I think it was in that Swedish death metal book, I think that they talk about Anti-Cymex a lot because it's so influential on all those Swedish death metal
bands. And you can definitely hear, and I was going to talk about this when we talked about Entombed and Carnage, like when you listen to Malevolent Creation or Deicide with the self-titled in 1990, great record. But when you listen to Deicide, you don't hear a lot of Discharge. When you hear Left Hand Path, they were listening to Anti-Cymex and Mob 47 records.
Who did Scandinavian Jawbreaker?
That's Anti-Cymex too. That's 93.
But it's a little later because that one is way heavier.
And it's funny because on the insert, on the sticker for Country of Sweden, it says, no metal, no this, just pure punk. And it's like, it's kind of metal.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy.
It's pretty heavy.
The same with Feel the Darkness is it's straight punk. There's songs, but...
my favorite album photo of all time. I gotta say this because everybody knows I always talk about. I've been looking for the Star button up for years at thrift stores. Phil from Anti-Cymex he looks like a total dirtbag with like the Star button up and like the sunglasses. Looks like he just rolled out of like a fucking crack house. And they look so fucking cool. Like they just don't give a shit about anything, which is my wardrobe. Goal is just to go to your house.
Looks you literally crawled out of a fucking metal trash.
Looks like
can.
you woke me up 5 minutes ago and I have a court date.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of like
it
that's
looks
what I
like
want
you're
with that.
behind the local Circle K asking for a fucking bum of smoke.
Right, and it's such a cool. But this other Blood, Guts, and Pussy by the Dwarves, and other classic. Love that record.
I don't think I've ever listened to that.
Pig Destroyer got me into this record. With
Who's that?
Pig Destroyer covering "Fuck You Up and Get High" when I was younger. Love this.
Well, here's I'm probably going to.
Massacre by Exploited, also underrated.
What is it?
Massacre by Exploited, also underrated.
Okay.
Nailed, Deviated Instinct I had. Great crust record.
See, I went for more my obviously Poison Idea. I had Anti-Cymex. I'm really like just getting into that band. But
awesome.
You've mentioned it a million times.
Amazing.
I've read it in those books. Anytime you're looking at the history of Swedish death metal, so love the album. It's like Anti-Cymex, Discharge, all that stuff. But I threw in Social D with the self-titled, and then Bad Religion with Against the Grain. I know you're not big fans of them, right?
It's Social Distortion. I think, I feel badly for the young kids that had to go to those shows, and with their parents, because there's the meme of like the rockabilly. You have the kids of the rockabilly parents have no idea what's going on.
So obviously,
but no, they have their own fans, and that is great. Bad Religion, also an influential band,
But it's like, obviously our buddy Jay's like a brother to me, and we've seen Social D so many times. That crowd is there. That crowd isn't us. We go, anytime Jay and I go, we're just like, we love Social D. Now, arguably, for me, I like the angrier era of Social D. So this album isn't too angry, but it's still a good album. I think it's still that kind of like cowpunk,
they're a popular band.
Rockabilly.
They have their audience for sure.
And this is definitely phenomenal album for me. But I get, when you do go to those shows, you see a lot of these weekend warrior idiots where they dress up like they're fucking, like they were born in the 50s or something, and they're just greasers. And it's like, come on, dude. You work at a bank during the week, and you don't look like that. Like, it's just
catchy songs though for what they. I had instead What We Believe, one of the greatest Youth Crew hardcore records of all time, 1990. SNFU, Real Men Don't Watch Quincy. SNFU's classic.
Do you like Shelter? Because I know they had an album.
Shelter, I was gonna wait. I thought you were gonna bring up Shelter, so I didn't, because I know that's an influential record too. Not something I'm really was too into. Love Cro-Mags, but that's my Krishna hardcore stuff is kind of stops with me.
So you're the punk guy. I like punk, but you're like up here, and I'm still like way down here when it comes to the amount of punk that I listen to. So when I was trying to choose, not like we talked about choosing 5, I just always like, I'll throw 5 in there. I was having a hard time trying to find another one, and this isn't punk, but I guess you say it's like alternative kind of post-punk back then, and that was Helmet, Strap It On.
Helmet, Strap It On's great. I had that in my rock category, but that's a great record.
It could go in that too.
There's a band, there's one of my albums, I think, if you're getting into that Anti-Cymex, and for the people that are just maybe checking them out, Nightmare from Japan, Give Notice of Nightmare, if you like the Anti-Cymex record, Give Notice of Nightmare is one of the best. Everybody loves, Ikesama, the 88 EP, but 1990, Give Notice of Nightmare, that's one of the greatest Japanese.
What's the band?
Nightmare.
Okay.
And Neurosis, Word is Law, one of the last Neurosis, still punk in 1990.
I love that.
It's a good album.
I'll be honest with you, dude. I like
I think I like early Neurosis more than I like Neurosis. Like, as I get older, I like the early stuff way more.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I think the metal injection reviewers are all in grad school who wrote theses on their album reviews. Made me hate them. Where like shades of violins curl over the washing waves. I'm like, I fucking hate this fucking band and you. Like, I can't listen to this shit anymore. Like, I think that your professor gives you a D on this fucking
And it I don't know if you want to transition kind of into the I took heavy metal, just straight heavy metal, like metal albums, and then kind of mixed it with a few of the doom albums that were in there.
What did you have for Doom? Because the only thing I have was the Morning September demo by Disembowelment and Cathedral Memoriam demo, but Obsessed self-titled, which we've talked about before.
Obsessed self-titled, River of Souls, my favorite Obsessed song of all time. That album, I think the album is just fucking absolutely perfect. Trouble self-titled, if you really want to consider that Doom.
I had that in the rock category because I think that kind of starts there more.
It does. It kind of, their album on Deaf American and kind of getting into that more
rockin' thing.
Yeah, more kind of straightforward. But St. Vitus 5.
Yeah.
That's another phenomenal fucking album. So
first Vitus I ever bought. So
really,
yeah.
I mean, it's really fucking cool album. I mean, obviously, I'm a huge Vitus fan. I mean, I love Obsessed, Vitus, Trouble. I threw Black Sabbath Tear in there. It's not Doom. It's more, I mean, it's Sabbath. But
it's an underrated record.
Tony Martin, absolutely underrated album. To me, it's like, The Eternal Idol, Headless Cross, Tear, those albums. It's like the trifecta of just.
I know a lot of people that think the Tony Martin era is right after the Dio era is the best.
No, and I can respect that. I think they're phenomenal. I think it's a phenomenal era. I also threw Danzig 2 in there.
We were going to talk about it, and I was going to say, man, that's probably of all the records going through into this episode, that's the perfect Danzig record, and that might be, honestly, Lucifuge might be one of my favorite things he's ever done. Period. Misfits, Samhain, Danzig, all of it. That might be my top 3 favorite things he's ever done.
And I've said before,
vocally, he's the best.
How the Gods Kill is my favorite, but I agree with you that this is, when people are like, what does Danzig sound like? Go listen to Lucifuge.
Yeah, because I love the first one.
Love it.
But it's still a little, they're finding it. I think vocally, on 2, he's perfect.
Dude, it's so fucking good.
Put on that record, you're like, I remember after he tracked the last song, that engineer hit off, and he was like, that's fucking it, dude. Like, that's...
And it's like, and 3, like, again, that's my favorite, but it is doomier, it's kind of creepier.
He starts to kind of lose it a little bit, too.
2 is the shit. 2 is just fucking perfect.
Not a bad song on it.
Yeah, and that album is fucking phenomenal. I threw in... if we're doing just, obviously you have Priest with Painkiller. I
was going to put that in the thrash category because there's a lot of influence of a lot of there's a lot of Japanese influence on that too, with like the production, like stuff like what Loudness ended up doing and a lot of other bands from Japan. It's a crisp record. It's big sounding.
I'm a Priest fanatic, and I like that album, but it's not in my top 5 favorite Priest albums.
It's awesome though, and I think a lot of extreme metal fans. I liked it as a younger extreme metal fan. It helped me get more into Priest.
Yeah, I mean, the other stuff, look, it's definitely a better album than Ram It Down. I think it's obviously better than Turbo.
Right.
I think it's a fucking killer album, but is it one of my favorite Priest albums? No, it's not in my top 5, but I still think it's an iconic fucking album. I mean, obviously...
Cover's great.
The title track is just... You can't go wrong with the title track. Compared
to a lot of other rock bands are doing at this time, though, it's pretty big. Did you have a lot of rock for this? Because my favorite of 90 is Razor's Edge by AC/DC.
Really?
I love that record. I always have. Money Talks, one of my favorite
I love it too.
Of all time.
My rock albums.
Station.
My rock albums, Monster Magnet, the EP.
We knew it was coming.
Got to throw it in there. No, I mean that's a great EP, but I threw in Extreme 2 Pornography, which I'm fucking just so stoked to go see. I've never seen them. And I don't give a shit, like, if there's people watching that are like, I can't believe you guys are talking about Extreme. Nuno Betancourt's one of the fucking most insane guitar players on, like, alive today. And they're coming to the MGM here, I think in February. and I'm just January or February, but I'm just fucking absolutely ecstatic. Like,
I listened to it. I listened to it a lot for this. I will say, Heartbreak Station by Cinderella, though, Lynch Mob, Wicked Sensation,
That's Wicked Sensation is,
and Rat Detonator. Detonator by Rat might be one of my favorite Rat. That's a great album, man.
I think that
aside from Invasion of Your Privacy, I think Detonator might actually get.
Detonator's a great album. You can start to see the cracks forming, and I think Invasion's my favorite, but Detonator is one that doesn't get talked about enough.
It's unsung. It's a good album.
I mean, Lovin' You's a Dirty Job.
Is such a catchy song, man.
But yeah, Lynch Mob, Wicked Sensation that's still my favorite Lynch Mob album.
Now, Self-Titled is my favorite, which we didn't talk about a lot in 92. I think we touched on it, but that's my favorite Lynch Mob record. But Wicked Sensation, so great. Heartbreak Station, though, by Cinderella, that's another one that's an underrated album.
It is, and there's this weird transition. The Sunset Strip era is coming to an end.
Yeah, it's ending here.
The Seattle scene is getting bigger because you had Alice in Chains with Facelift.
Mother Love Bone.
Mother Love Bone.
Apple is a great album.
It is. It's phenomenal.
Facelift.
Facelift was the first CD I ever bought. I mean, I was just a kid and I fucking worshipped that album. Black Crowes, Shake Your Money Maker.
It's becoming uncool to be a hair band right now.
That's kind of the thing. The Black Crowes really brought in like the Stones vibe.
Yeah. I think Lynch Mob did that too, and Cinderella had that too with bluesy rock.
It was bluesier. It wasn't
glammy.
That's the thing. When people shit on the Sunset Strip, I'm like, you're thinking of like Poison and Warrant and
which, by the way, Flesh and Blood is a good album.
And I love all that stuff because I grew up. My older sister listened. We still love that stuff. But there's more to it than just like the real kind of popular shit that came out. Because Lynch Mob. If you don't like
Cherry
George
Pie
Lynch,
by Warrant, which came out this year, is kind of the cliche of that era.
That song is absolutely a cliche of that era. Even Janie Lane in interviews was like,
I wish I would have never written it.
Yeah, I fucking kill myself for that. And then he ended up dying, so who knows?
It is a good album, though. Besides
the rest of the songs, dude, Mr. Rainmaker. I mean, there's some The album was supposed to be called Uncle Tom's Cabin, and it really wasn't about like, eating a chick's pussy and backstage at Gazzari's.
Which who doesn't like that? I mean, I personally, as a fan, prefer songs about that.
Yeah.
But that's like, I don't want to hear your pros on.
But
on
they
social
wanted
issues.
it to be heavier. They wanted it to be heavier. But that era, because I think some of these bands saw it coming, that the end was very fucking nigh, but
it was on the horizon.
But yeah, the Black Crowes with Shake Your Moneymaker just fucking came out of nowhere, and that was like, holy shit, this doesn't sound like like pop metal. It doesn't sound like the Sunset Strip.
Do you know my most important record of the year, though? I have to say, this is a controversial, maybe not controversial. My most important record of the year, which I think goes in what you're saying, is Goo by Sonic Youth.
It's a really
Sonic
good
Youth have been. I don't know if you're really a fan of the earlier Sonic Youth stuff. I love I love the early stuff, Sister, and their early albums. But I think
Goo is a perfect album.
I think Goo was the first Geffen release, and actually Nirvana that was signed the same year because they had the Sliver EP, which I think I posted today. The Sliver single with my favorite Nirvana song on it, Dive. Sonic Youth Goo sold 100,000 copies on Geffen, which was a big thing for an underground band to do.
Yeah.
Goo is a little bit more of a departure from the noise rock stuff they were doing. It is a little more polished. And the goal for Nirvana was to sell like Goo did, which was sell 100,000. Obviously, we all know they surpassed that.
Yeah.
But I think Goo is the most important one because if you look at Warrant, look at all these bands, even Cinderella, it's like, for Sonic Youth to crawl up the charts like that and get kind of a big deal, so the end is coming. For these bands.
And here's the thing: a lot of those bands, even the Seattle bands, they weren't. It's not like they just started and they popped and it was like
they've been around.
No, all of these bands like Soundgarden, obviously Pearl Jam. No, they didn't. They were in different.
Pixies have a record in '90, Bossa Nova,
Green River, but yeah. I know Nick is gonna fucking cream his pants for you mentioning it because he just went and saw the Pixies a couple nights ago.
And the Breeders had Pod this year.
But it's like all of these bands existed and they just got bigger. And I think people wanted something different. And much to their own detriment, those bands, I always mention it, Phil Collin from Def Leppard had a perfect quote. Ironic because he's in Def Leppard saying this, but he said, when there's a stereotype and everything became the stereotype, it was absolutely fucking pathetic.
Yeah.
Which is funny. It's like, A, I agree with you. B, I love the first several, like, Hysteria back. C, you became a fucking stereotype of your own band.
He says that while he's sitting on his like really expensive couch that he bought, being a stereotype.
But that back then I was getting into, like, with Alice in Chains and stuff like that, and Jane's Addiction, Ritual de lo Habitual.
Iggy Pop, Brick by Brick.
I'm a huge, dude.
Love that record.
When I was a kid, I got the Shocker soundtrack.
Yeah.
Okay. Iggy Pop's on there doing, I think it's Love Transfusion. And my folks went, for Christmas, they were like, write down, dude, I'm fucking, whatever that movie came out, 89.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like right around this time, dude, I'm like 10 years old, okay? I don't know who the fucking Stooges are at that point. And my parents, they were like reading the list of like albums that like, the shit that I wanted for Christmas. And I remember them going, what's an Iggy Pop? I'm like, no, you don't understand, man. He's on the Shocker soundtrack, which I'm still, I know Jay and I know you're into.
Yeah.
But yeah, Iggy Pop is fucking great, dude.
Depeche Mode, Violator, I also put in this kind of like a... Again, a little thing with Depeche Mode. Violator is one of my favorite albums of all time. I love Depeche Mode. I am a sad goth at heart, so I want to just dance.
Well, I'm going to throw in...
Skinny Puppy, Too Dark Park.
You're saying you're a sad goth at heart. I'm throwing in 3 albums by 3 bands that came out. Sisters of Mercy.
Oh, I knew you were going to say it first. That's like...
Vision Thing, The Mission, Mission UK, whatever the fuck you call them, had Carved in Sand, which I think is phenomenal. And then my favorite band of that ilk, that whole scene, which is Fields of the Nephilim, they had Elysium.
That's right.
Which, that's not my favorite Fields album, but which is just the Nephilim, album before this. But this album is fucking incredible. And I know those some people watch are probably like, you guys are talking about goth rock. But you know how many fucking bands were influenced?
This is also like, what's funny about that Sister stuff and Fields is like, they're kind of coming to the tail end of that 80s.
Yeah.
Which like Skinny Puppy, Too Dark Park, it's like Skinny Puppy in the 80s was a thing. And Too Dark Park is like their culmination of like all the 80s stuff. Then you get to like Frontline Assembly with Isolate, which is again that ending of that. This stuff was already happening in the 80s. So what you're saying about a lot of these alternative bands, like the hair metal stuff, people think of all the 80s. It's like this stuff was already happening in the 80s and was a thing. Like Sisters of Mercy's ending by 90. Like, Fields is kind of ending, and it's like Skinny Puppy's going to go into a different era into the 90s, which I don't really care too much for. I like their 80s stuff more.
Yeah,
Frontline Assembly is going to go more into a different. This industrial thing, 10,000 Homo DJs, the Supernaut single, that's big. That's industrial's kind of like going to go into the next wave of what would be the 90s, which would be Nine Inch Nails. And
this was
like
my
that.
favorite era of industrial. I mean, Killing Joke is one of my favorite bands, and that Extremities album.
And that's even a culminate. Their 80s stuff.
I'm fucking ashamed to say that I didn't even throw it on here. It's just shameful. But that's a fucking grimy album, man. I mean,
It is.
And I think around this time, obviously, with what's Pretty Hate Machine? Is that 89?
The demos for Pretty Hate Machine are 90. Are for around this same time, but I think it's around 89. Yeah.
Yeah, because but like, Nine Inch Nails, Ministry, that was kind of like Frontline Assembly.
Skinny Puppy.
Do you remember the Decrups? Mm-hmm. They did like the Metallica tribute. It was like tribute to Metallica. I can't remember the name of it. But yeah, I mean, the Thousand Homo DJs with who was fucking Al.
Yeah, it's Al.
Alien Jorgensen, whatever the fuck. I know their ministry's touring now with Filter and Alice Cooper and Rob Zombie. My sister's actually taken my niece to go see them out in Seattle here, probably next week, I'm thinking. And I was like, well, let me look at, first of all, I don't give a shit about Filter at all. It's like, whatever. I mean, I don't mind the song Hey Man, Nice Shot.
Sure.
That album is kind of like whatever. And I get the connection with Nine Inch Nails and all that. To me, it was like that band was that song and then just disappeared. But
yeah,
I said,
it's kind of a one-hit wonder.
I was like, let me look at Ministry. Let me look at their set list and see. Because they're not, my sister's not really a Ministry, not really that familiar with them. I looked at the set list and I was like, holy fuck, dude. It's like everything off of like fucking Land of Rape and Honey,
nice.
Mind, Psalm 69. I was like, yeah, this shit's going to be fucking great. So, but that's some really dark shit, that era of industrial with, like, that's a perfect thing you said about the tail end of goth. Because really, that was like really it for like Depeche Mode. I mean, these bands still.
Violator is a huge record for Depeche, but even like the '80s synth stuff of Depeche Mode is a little different. Violator is a lot popular. Like I remember my sister having Violator and liking that album, and she did not like any other Depeche Mode records.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like Personal Jesus was like on at the skate rink when I was a kid. Like that was like before we wrap it up, I always forget records. I gotta say, this is a weird segue. Citizen's Arrest, A Light in the Darkness. I forgot about mentioning them, and I really, really do want to say too that like I think that one of my favorite records. I think I mentioned SOB a little bit, but What's the Truth? I think people really need to check out. If you're into Harmony Corruption, we talked about that a lot. But I think SOB's What's the Truth is as equal to Harmony Corruption.
I wanted to ask you when we were talking about crossover, because I know in the past. You've been a pretty anti-suicidal tendencies guy. What do you think?
I think.
Has it changed, or are you still kind of?
I just don't like them. I don't. I respect their influence. I know my friend Matt Sashry, who you've met, Matt Tard. He's loves suicidal. I mean, I think they're definitely important, but I just can't get into. I even tried to put on Lights Camera Revolution. I wanted to listen to it. I want to like it. I don't know why. And I love Attitude Adjustment. I love a lot of bands from that era. I love even bands from the same area where they're from.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't listen to the records as much. And I mean, sometimes it's just like that. There's, I've never, I've tried to enough where I just don't. I think it's just not really my thing. But
yeah, and I'm a massive. I love Suicidal. That Lights Camera Revolution is like the last one that I think for me is a 10 out of 10. Everything after that, the Art of Rebellion, it's okay. It's just not the same. Suicidal for Life, it just it was like, all right. I mean, the last album they put out was really good. I thought it was solid, but I think that they were missing. To me, it's like when you're missing Rocky George as a guitar player, you're missing a lot. And Mike Clark, to me, Mike Clark is more suicidal than Mike Muir. Maybe that's fucking blasphemy, but to me, Mike Clark is more, But that album was. I remember hearing that album and it literally fucking just like hooked me and it just pulled me in. And it's. But I meant to ask you about that.
I think that you'll really like that Righteous Pigs record, though. Stress Related is really if you talk about crossover stuff, I think that's one of the more interesting records of that kind of style.
Yeah. I'll check it out. I'm going to write it down here.
And Relapse Records starts in 1992. Velcro Overdose, Face of Decline, first Apparition single. Those are the first releases on Relapse Records, which would start in 1990, which would be more than influential throughout the decade. So, gotta mention that.
I'm trying to think of when. I was sitting here thinking Deceased, but Luck of the Corpse is 91, not
That's
90.
the first band signed. That's why I brought up those 3 releases on Relapse, because Deceased is the first band signed. But I made it a point to bring out that those first 3 releases on Relapse are, technically it starts the label and goes on that trajectory, which they go throughout the 90s. But we covered a lot.
I think it's a pretty even year for everything that we talked about. Obviously didn't delve like too much into industrial or the goth stuff, but it seems like everything, when you point to whether it's alternative, like you have Sonic Youth and Jane's Addiction and Mother Love Bone, more of that, all that shit is classic and solid.
What's funny too about the stuff is, it's funny, like Mother Love Bone and bands like that are still more like hard rock at this point. I don't think of this Facelift as an alternative record.
No, I don't either. To me, it's just a fucking metal album.
Yeah.
There's 2 bands, like Alice in Chains to me was just a metal band. They had their own thing going on. Soundgarden was the same, where I think with like Bad Motorfinger, with Louder Than Love and Bad Motorfinger, they were definitely, they were way heavier than alternative, like the other
heavier
alternative
than the Sonic Youth record,
yeah,
for sure.
And
100%.
But I think that you could literally close your eyes and just fucking, if you were just spitballing and you could choose any album from back then, it's crazy, because it seemed like there were so many fucking perfect, whether it's death metal, thrash metal.
I think of alternative in this year. I think of Bossa Nova, Sonic Youth with Goo. I think of maybe, I would even say like Fugazi Repeater is more alternative. I think of Alice in Chains and Mother Love Bone as more hard rock, more closer to. I think Mother Love Bone is closer to Heartbreak Station than it is Goo. Which is funny in the 90s. I think in marketing they would say it's closer to Goo, but it's like not really.
I think it's just because of the scene that they were in and who they were hanging around with. But no, I agree. I don't know. Do I think it sounds like Cinderella? No. But I agree with you that it's closer to more of that like 80s kind of sunset.
I bet you the guys in Cinderella and Mother Love Bone have more musically in common than the guys in Sonic Youth and Mother Love Bone. I think,
no, for real. I mean, absolutely. And so I think it was just a fucking great time, for music. 90, 91, 92.
Awesome.
And then we're going to end it on 93, which is literally fucking like chunky diarrhea.
Oh, you mean 97, yeah.
97,
right.
I say 93.
Yeah.
97. I mean, there's some good things with 97. I know we're going to be able to talk about some really solid albums, but when I'm looking at, okay, well, what shit came out, and then you see all the stuff that's listed. There's all these Creed.
I love that we haven't mentioned. I will say this too. We haven't. We've gone the whole time doing this retrospective without mentioning the fucking Deftones. We're gonna have to mention them, and I'm gonna let you know right now that there's not a band I probably hate more, and I feel so sorry that so many guys throughout their.
Thank you. I hate.
So many guys have had to pretend to like that band to get laid, and my heart goes out to every single one of them. So that's all I want to say about the Deftones. That's all I have to say about that.
I'm going to tell you right now, and this is a threat to be up, if he even brings that fucking band up, like seriously, I'm going to...
Yeah, I don't want to listen to overweight Hispanic goth from gothic new metal from California.
That fucking band, dude, I just don't even...
Yeah, it's not good.
But there's enough good shit that we'll be able to fill up an hour and a half of good stuff. If not, I'm just going to talk about In Flames Horror Cold to try and fill some stuff. I'm sure there's some great stuff. It just kind of like a cursory glance of it. I was like, geez, God, dude, this is going to be that great. Nothing like this year. But I think as soon as we finish 97, are we going to go...
And we're going to do a label retrospectives going with that,
So we're going to do...
maybe some guests.
Century Media, Relapse, Nuclear Blast, Metal Blade.
Def Jam. No, we'll get it. Rogue Runner, we'll have to do. I think they're due one.
Yeah, and Mike from Hammer was here earlier. Everybody check out Hammer.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was like, dude, get on it. I want a fucking riff. I want intro music, outro music, just something quick that we can throw on there. But Hammer's a great fucking band. And they're still on Hells, right?
Yeah.
Hell's Headbangers. So, give them for any metalhead that lives under a rock and doesn't know who Hell's Headbangers is.
Right. You need to check
absolutely get over there, get over their website and fucking check it out, because it's, in my opinion, the best fucking independent distro and label. Absolutely fucking, they do their t-shirt selections fucking disgusting.
Very much so.
That label just fucking rules. So again, thanks to Justin for the last episode.
Thank you, Justin, so much. And they have very, very, very beautiful angelic employees that work there.
Oh shit!
But thanks for tuning in. It's a good year.
Absolutely. All right, yeah. Give us your thoughts in the comments and whatnot on some of your favorite albums, and don't be afraid. If you guys listen to stuff that you think is like out of the box, that somebody will think like, I don't give a shit. That's what we do here. We don't care what people listen to.
No. Don't say anything about that Nightmare record though. Give Notice Nightmare. Or I'll cry, because I am a sad goth after all. So.
But yeah. Give us your thoughts on like what some of your favorite thrash, death. It doesn't matter what it is. I know there's a lot of death metal guys that do listen to some fucking 80s hard rock stuff and early 90s. It's like, don't be afraid. Throw it in there. Throw in some shit that you like and some of the
stuff we missed maybe that you thought.
Yeah, because there's always shit, especially with these years, 90, 91, 90. There's shit we missed.
Yeah, I know for the death metal freaks, we missed 3,000 demos from 1990, which I know are great. Ken's Death Metal Crypt, check him out for all that stuff. Great channel on YouTube.
Yeah, phenomenal.
All right.
Peace.
Cheers.